American history. In fact, this is the day where on 43 years ago today, Malcolm X, Omawali, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz was cut down in New York City. In fact, in the very space we are in right now. We're broadcasting live from the Audubon Ballroom in New York City on Broadway. And we are here under the auspices of a great institution that we will acknowledge first and foremost, an institution carrying on the vision of Brother Minister Malcolm and Dr. Betty Shabazz, the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center. Let's give them a round of applause. I will say at the outset that if you have not had the opportunity to walk through this building and to see the very moving photographs and images of Malcolm and his family, of course we sit just to the left of those who are listening on the radio, on Sirius Satellite Radio. We sit just to the left, appropriately, we're on the Sirius Left channel. We sit just to the left of Malcolm in his statue right here, and it is a very moving experience, so much so that I personally really wanted to be here. And I'm thankful to both the Center and the Sirius Satellite Radio and all of the staff here in New York, our producer Taria Rogers, our engineer John, our program director Serena Cordilla, we are David Gorab, all involved to help make this possible. Now, I was also so moved that when I went upstairs, I was at Kondo, who I introduced in a moment or two, gave me his own tour of space and the scene of that terrible event 43 years ago and showed me exactly where the lectern was, where the bullets were going out. Malcolm is an ancestor. As an African person in the African tradition, I had no choice but to thank God, thank Allah for his sacrifice. And Malcolm's words ring as true today as they ever did. Is that right?
Amen.
Especially when we listen to the Ballad of the Bullet and what is taking place right now in America. And we're going to get into all that. I'm very, very thankful again for everyone's participation. Another organization that helped to bring this together. This is really a coalition between Make It Plain and Sirius Satellite Radio and the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial Education Center here under the executive directorship of the Woti Isir, who we will talk to a bit later, but also the Coalition on Political Assassination. It is critical that we don't look at any of this in a vacuum, of course, because we know that between 1963 and 1968, there were a number of political assassinations, some well-known individuals, some not so well-known. And only a fool would think that all of these things were just happenstance or coincidental.
Amen.
We're coming up on the 40th anniversary of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy, the 45th anniversary of JFK, and of course Malcolm in between, Medgar Evers and others. And so all of this must be put in the proper context. The first thing I'm going to do now is introduce our panel, and I want to remind all the panelists that we all need to speak directly into the microphone so that everyone can hear you. To the audience, and I'm thankful to all of you for coming out, even on short notice, because we didn't give out a whole lot of notice, because we came together and just said, let's do this. And I'm thankful to all of you here, to all of you who are listening on Sirius Radio around the world. We appreciate you joining us. First of all, in case you missed it, my name is, well, I have two names. My traditional name is Matsimla Mafumo. My Christian name is Mark Thompson. You all know we do that in our experience here in America. But I'm the host of Make It Plain. I want to introduce the very distinguished panel that we have here. And one of the panelists has joined us. We want to try to get him a chair. But first of all, I'm going to start to my left and come across Dr. Jared Ball of Morgan State University. Is he a professor, lecturer, a talk show host on Pacifica himself? Please welcome Dr. Jared Ball. Perhaps one of the first individuals to author a definitive narrative on the fateful events that occurred here 43 years ago. He now teaches at Baltimore City Community College. He is the author of Conspiracies, Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X, Baba Zach Kondo. Please give him a round of applause. A dear friend, and he and I, bump into one another on the front lines many times. It's something, sometimes we don't even get to talk to one another. When you can bump into each other on the front lines, you know that you're in the right place and in good company. I mentioned the Coalition on Political Assassinations. He heads that organization, and I'm thankful there is an organization of that type to continue to give us context and to prevent us from forgetting history. Please welcome John Judge. Give him a round of applause. Another dear friend and elder and mentor who I miss seeing regularly in Washington, D.C. He was a part of the original founding of the old AAU. And you know what that is, correct? For those who don't, the Organization of African American Unity, one of the organizations that Minister Malcolm founded just before his death. This individual was a significant part of that, and we do well to hear from him. A. Peter Bailey is here with us. Give him a round of applause. Our next guest is, we all know and love. Now, I was saying to my producer earlier, Ms. Rogers, we call Muhammad Ali the greatest because he won 3 heavyweight titles, correct? Now, if she, she ran for office one time, lost, got elected again, had the heavyweight title, so to speak, she'll have the distinction of being the greatest. And in the company of Muhammad Ali, we all want to respect her for her work. One of the most, when she was in Congress, one of the most outspoken and fearless members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and there is no coincidence there either in terms of the sacrifices she's made and some of the repercussions that she's had to endure. But we're happy to have her, and we do acknowledge that she is a candidate with the Green Party for the presidency of the United States. There aren't just 2 presidents, or 3. I don't know how many left after today. It changes so much. But Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, give her another very dear friend who introduced me to the center and whom I first broached this idea with, and we really got together on short notice, folks, so we appreciate the work of the center. This individual is a member of the board here at the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Memorial Education Center. And every year on Malcolm's birthday, he keeps Malcolm's spirit alive again as a people of the earth, especially as African people, and to some extent we all are African people because Africa is the mother of all civilization. But to preserve ancestry and to link to our ancestral memory is so important, and he leads the pilgrimages annually to Brother Malcolm's, to Minister Malcolm's gravesite, and we appreciate him keeping that alive. He's at the City College of New York, a dear brother and comrade, Professor James Small is here. Please welcome him. So this, we'll have a discussion. We will, this is commercial radio to some extent, even though it's satellite radio. We will take a commercial break here and there. Not very many though, I promise. But we want to have this dialogue. I'm going to speak to each panelist, ask each of them a question that I'd like for them to include in an opening statement, particularly what it means for them to be here. I don't know about you, but this to me is a very spiritual moment.
Yes, it is.
To be here and to be where this brother was. We can only imagine what this country would have been had he lived, had JFK lived, or RFK, or MLK, if all of these individuals had lived, and the tension that existed between all of them been allowed to come to full fruition to make not only this nation a better place, but the world. Let's begin with John Judge, the Coalition on Political Assassinations. And John, share with us, if you will, a little bit not only about the coalition, but why you were here, why this is important to you, and give us that historical context, if you will, when it comes to all of these things happening in that short span of time. John Judge.
Thanks. Well, I am very honored, really, and pleased to be able to be part of the event. I have been hoping to have a meeting of the coalition here at the historic site, because we hold conferences, and will this year, because it is an anniversary year for so many different assassinations. We'll be holding conferences in April in Memphis, and in June in Los Angeles, and in November in Dallas. But we traditionally have our conferences near to or at the assassination sites from the 1960s. So I think that to put it in a historical context, for us, I can't see how you can ask young people of color to follow in the footsteps of people like Dr. Martin Luther King or people like Malcolm X if you're not going to not only honor their lives and their message, but also if you're not going to solve their murders.
Amen.
Because I think the message you're sending then is that if you take that risk and someone kills you, we're not going to find justice there for you either. And I think that message is one that, you know, we've moved on to people's lives, but their deaths still hang, and there really hasn't been any real justice done. In one case, Medgar Evers, there was finally a criminal resolution and a conviction of Barlin de Beckwith, and there was a civil trial that the King family brought, where the facts, at least, surrounding the King assassination came out. Malcolm's death remains a riddle, as we'll hear today, and the murders of the two Kennedy brothers are still improperly investigated and unsolved. To put it in a broader, deeper historical context, you may not know that between 1928 and 1932, in the Weimar Republic in Germany, there were 400 murders that were admitted by the Weimar Republic to be political murders. They were academicians, they were organizers and union leaders, they were musicians, they were people that worked for social change in that society. And those murders laid the groundwork for the rise of the brown shirts in the Nazi Party. And I see the pattern of murders here in the United States very similar to that. And in all of my work, I found, in the work of people in the coalition, I found parallels between the murders and also connections between the murders of these major leaders of those years, and people who provided some sense of hope for change, whether it was on that national level or a smaller level, because there were also hundreds of murders here and continue to be murders here, to quash political dissent and quash the truth from getting out. And so resolving those, and also recognizing that the people that brought themselves into power with the murders of John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, that prevented the rise of a black messiah, as the COINTELPRO paper spoke about, that prevented that hope, are still in power in this country. Amen. And still calling the shots and also covering up the information. But we have had success in getting files loose, at least. And I worked with Representative McKinney for a period in Congress, and even before that period, trying to get into law a Martin Luther King Records Act that would have released the 600,000 to 700,000 pages on Dr. King's life and death that were at the House Select Committee on Assassination. So I think we need to reclaim our history. Our history's been stolen from us and buried in Suitland, Maryland, in an underground building. But the history of all these assassinations needs to come forward, and we were pleased to have a chance to bring together some of the people that know the most about the assassination of Malcolm X, about COINTELPRO, to talk to you today at this event. And people who want to find out about us and our events can go to just the word politicalassassinations.com on the internet. We'll get information about the coalition.
For our listening audience, John Judge, politicalassassinations.com to follow up with that. Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, the meaning for you being here today, and I understand that you have been doing research on COINTELPRO itself. Tell us all about that, if you will.
Thank you very much for holding this. I would like to also add my word of thanks to those who make this event possible in this very special place. For me, this is sacred ground for those of us who struggle. And as I look out into the audience and I see every chair filled, it is clear that there are a lot of us who struggle, and we want very much to follow in the footsteps of Malcolm X. In our trip over here to this venue, we were listening to Malcolm's speeches that were being played on the radio. And it was clear that he believed in political action for justice. But that political action also had to have an agenda. And so I would like to, at least for half a minute, just say that whatever our political action might consist of, whatever it is that we do in the political arena, we must do it with a specific agenda for an outcome that is measurable. We cannot just give our votes away. People died literally for the right to vote. We give our votes away without an agenda. And the statistics that reflect the state of Black America make it clear to us that we have given our votes away without an agenda. But in addition, because of the work that I've done on the counterintelligence program and the information, quite frankly, that has been made available to me because of my relationship with John Judge, we know that there was intense media distortion about him. We know that the government also fed stories to the media, and the media were willingly compliant in printing stories that were outright lies. We know that.
Amen.
So we have to we can't be surprised if the government representatives told us 935 lies that ended up getting us into war in Iraq, and the government and the media repeated those lies without question. We shouldn't be surprised, because this is nothing new. This isn't the first time it's happened. I would also like to say a few words about my relationship with John Judge and COPA, and the fact that we do have research that John and COPA have done with respect to JFK, RFK. But then when I went into Congress from Georgia with a special relationship with the King family, being supported by the King family, and I also have to say that my political campaigns were also supported by Dr. Betty Shabazz as well. But we learned that from the work that COPA had done on JFK, that there were direct tie-ins with the murder of MLK. And so we have to have the truth. We must search for the truth. And so then right here in New York City, where 3,000 people were murdered on September 11th, we also have to have 911 truth. It is because of our pursuit of the truth that we introduced legislation while I was in Congress to open up the government's archives and records and documents, not only with respect to the murder of MLK, but also with respect to the murder of Tupac. Then I would like to say, finally, that because of the work that John had done and COPA had done historically on all of the political assassinations, they've inspired me to change my dissertation topic from something that was very esoteric in dealing with international affairs. But I've been accepted into the University of California at Berkeley's PhD program, where I'm going to write about political assassination. Because many of the family survivors of the people who were murdered during the COINTELPRO era have not yet received justice.
Amen.
And they need justice too. I would just like to conclude by saying that there was a document that was made available to me dated May 11th, 1965. It had a CIA stamp on it, and it said somewhere at the top there must be a Negro who is clean, who can step into the vacuum and chaos once Dr. King is either exposed or assassinated. This document points to regime change on Black America. So what happened with Malcolm, what happened with Martin, what happened with Fred Hampton, what happened with the Black Panthers, what happened with all of our political prisoners, we must understand was a pattern that was a part of regime change, which is responsible to this day for the statistics of racial disparities that continue to plague us in the political arena, which means then that we cannot afford to participate without an agenda.
Amen.
I will conclude at this point.
Our dear friend and brother from City College, and if you would share a little bit about what you do every year as well, Professor James Small from City College in New York.
Okay, Malcolm's sister Ellen started, she took over OAU after Malcolm's assassination. And in '66, when I returned home from the war, I became one of her bodyguards, and for the next 18 years I did that. But also worked in OAU and Muslim Mosque, and also served 11 years as imam over the mosque, and went to Mecca to represent it in '75, doing my Hajj. This day is just a day of total infamy. This was an outright government assassination of our leader, my leader. How they did it is the details that we need to find out. They facilitated, they made possible, and we know how our government works. It makes sure. There is no way you could do this without having an assurance, because Malcolm would have left this country on that Tuesday for safety. And even though he had some difficult time to work it out, he would have left this country on that Tuesday, and he would have been in Red China by that Wednesday. So they needed to kill Malcolm quickly. We know that one of the reasons was his international position and America's position on the Cold War and the presentation of themselves as the moral alternative to the Soviets and others. And Malcolm was really muddying the water on that. But they were very concerned with the domestic relationships that had developed between Malcolm and other leaders in our civil rights movement. 2 weeks beyond the date of the 21st, Malcolm would have been in Mississippi with Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou at that time was an extraordinarily powerful sister in the political movement of the Democratic Party and the general movement of people. He had made his connections with Dr. King's organization and all of the major organizations, and Peter, who was a part of that process, can give more detail if you want to. They had agreed they would have a working relationship. My position is Malcolm's words, Malcolm's ideas, Malcolm's plans, Malcolm's agenda should become our plan and our agenda. And that's one of the things that I've been working on, and I'm so very happy to hear the sister lay it out like that. Malcolm says, I'm a black nationalist freedom fighter. Now, some people back away from that, but he described it. He said that black nationalism means you own the economic, politics, and culture and the geography where you live. And just look at the implications of that for the organized criminals that ran our community. You're talking about billions of dollars being moved from this space to this space. We don't think of it in those terms, but somebody owned the stores where we live. Somebody owned the real estates where we live. Somebody owned the businesses where we live. If Malcolm could have changed the socioeconomic dynamics of the black community, hundreds of billions of dollars would have moved from one community's hands into another community's hands. And as a part of understanding economic politics and culture the way he did, they understood it and what the meaning of his rise to influence and power within the domestic community and with his connections and newly established relationships within the international community, especially Africa, would have meant economically and politically for America.
Professor James Small, City College of New York. We are broadcasting from the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center on the site of the Audubon Ballroom, where Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21st, 1965. We're going to hear from our other panelists as soon as we return. Those of you who are in our audience here with us, and we're glad you're all here, in a little while we're going to pass out some index cards for you all to jot down questions for one or more of the panelists, and we invite you and welcome you to do that. So stay tuned, we'll be right back. This is Series Left 146. Refreshments in the back, too. That's right. I got you all. Memorial and Education Center on the anniversary of Malcolm X's assassination here on this site, which was, of course, the Audubon Ballroom. We heard from John Judge, Cynthia, McKinney, and James Small. I want to hear, we've got three other great panelists here. I want to remind those of you who are here in our audience here on location, we invite you to raise your hand if you'd like an index card to ask a question, and if you could direct your questions to one of the panelists rather than all of them. That would make room for everyone to be able to ask a question. We'll get to that a bit later. Of course, I'm Matsimla, Mark Thompson. As I said earlier, one of, and as James Small alluded to, one of Malcolm X's colleagues, one of the individuals who was there at the founding of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And just for our listeners at home who are listening who don't know all of the history, there were two organizations, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. You heard James Small, Professor James Small mention the MMI. That was the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. Here to share some of that history and experience with us, a very close confidant of Malcolm X, A. Peter Bailey. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, brother.
Good to see you, man.
Okay. I just want to say that it's very good to be here. I guess I could say that I was unfortunate enough on February 21st, 1965, to be in the Audubon Ballroom. That day, I was one of the last 4 or 5 people to speak with Brother Malcolm backstage on that Sunday. And my function with the organization was as the editor of the organization's newsletter. That was my introduction to journalism. In fact, he's directly responsible for the fact that I'm a journalist today. But I thought that what I would do today is talk a little bit, very briefly, about what Brother Malcolm was doing on an international level, because many of the people who write about him, they basically ignore what he was doing internationally because they want to reduce his assassination to just another case, you know, of black folks killing black folks, and keep it on that level rather than showing what he was doing. I just brought a few items here to show you. This was the way our newsletter looked. We were the only publication in America that published the speech that he made at the OAU conference. This is both the complete speeches in these 2 copies of our newsletter. This is a copy of an Indonesian newspaper which compared what was happening in the Congo when the United States and other forces invaded the Congo in '64. They said if the United States can invade the Congo to protect the nuns there, why can't they say that we can invade Mississippi to protect the lives of black people in Mississippi? That was unheard of. That was because of the groundwork laid by Brother Malcolm. This was an article that appeared on some speeches at the United Nations, in which 2 African diplomats, for the first time in history, and I think the only time in history, they spoke at the UN about the Congo situation, and both of them again raised that question. If the United States says it has the right to come into the Congo to protect someone, then who's to say that we don't have the right to go into Mississippi to protect the lives of the black people who are being killed down there? This was the summer of 1964, which was a vicious summer. So you have to put all of this into the context of the times to see that these African diplomats making those kind of statements unnerved. The article says that UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, was astonished when those diplomats made that connection because they had never heard it before. All of that happened as a result of the groundwork laid by Brother Malcolm and when he went as an observer, not as a participant, but as an observer to the 1964 OAU meeting in Cairo. This right here is an article that Brother Malcolm wrote for a newspaper called the Egyptian Gazette, and the article is entitled Racism, the Cancer That is Destroying America. He wrote this for a newspaper in Egypt. I have the entire article here. All of these things show you that he was acting on an international level, and a lot of people in power in the government did not like this. In fact, in Kenya, he was told by the ambassador, you have no right to come here and basically mess with our foreign policy. And he said, if you weren't doing what you're doing, then nothing I say would matter. So the fact that you're upset about it means that something is going on. And the reason I'm saying this is because the OAAU, the organization that he founded, was called, from the very beginning, was called a human rights organization, not a civil rights organization. And we use the term human rights deliberately because that's the international term. And Brother Malcolm had foreign policy objectives. And those objectives, one of which, the major one was to take the United States government before the UN Commission on Human Rights and accuse it of being either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of black people in this country. And again, put it in the context of what was going on in 1964, or in that whole period between 1955 and 1965, when Brother Malcolm was on the scene. If you put what he was saying then into that context, you get a much better idea as to why there were forces in this country who wanted to get rid of him. And one last piece I'll show, and then I'll like us a little bit more about it later, to show you again on the international level. Here's the last, here two more quick copies of the newsletter. This showed Brother Malcolm when he was given his official Muslim name at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. And this right here shows that Sheikh Mohammed Babu, who was the Prime Minister of Tanzania, spoke at one of our last rallies. That's what he was doing on an international level. And for them to try to reduce him to just, this was just a case of black folks killing black folks is erroneous. Lerone Bennett was, in an article once, Why Black History is Important to You, he said, the past, which is history, is a bet that your fathers placed that you must now cover. And I think that we got to make it getting these assassinations clear as to what was going on and why they were going on. We are doing our part in covering that bet. Thank you.
A. Peter Baylor, we thank you, sir. In Malcolm's speech, The Ballad of the Bullet, he talks about a younger generation of individuals being involved in the political process. One individual who works with young people, who's a professor who teaches young people, of course, is Dr. Jared Ball from Morgan State University. Dr. Ball, what this day, this space means to you, and what do you impart and what do you plan to impart to the young people you come in contact with? Dr. Jared Ball.
Well, first of all, thank you all for putting this together, and I'm humbled and actually in awe to be sitting here, and I mean that sincerely. The biggest struggle that we face in the classroom, in grassroots community organization, and just in general, I think, is how do you disseminate in the 21st century the ideology of a Malcolm X? How do you share and help popularize who Malcolm was, what his ideas were, always remembering that he was cognizant of the fact, as he said, that the U.S. had made image-making a science. And he was saying this 40 some odd years ago. So if they had perfected image making then, as he said quite accurately, then today, I don't know how you perfect perfection, but that is exactly what has occurred. the ability of a handful of people in today's world to popularize an image held by the tiniest segment of the world's population, the elite of the elite, and have that become what most of us consider to be our own interest and our own understanding of the world is at a point today that we have never seen in human history, and it's at a dangerous point. So when I was listening to Brother Bailey, I was remembering what Congressman John Lewis wrote in his memoirs about Malcolm, and he said that when he was a member of SNCC in 1964, he traveled throughout the continent of Africa, and everywhere he went, every leader told him, if you were anywhere to the right of Malcolm X, we don't even want to talk to you. So the idea that in 1964 Malcolm X would be the standard by which black American political struggle was measured on an international level, then flash forward to 2001, before 9/11, which in many ways, for those of us who look at image, maybe more than most, or as a primary source or point of departure for analysis, the image, and I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but perhaps the image of a Colin Powell telling the world, a black man telling the world that we, the United States, will not participate in a world conference against racism, is almost an image 9/11 prior to the real one that happened a few months later. I mean, the idea that you could go from Malcolm X being the standard in 1964 to Colin Powell becoming or naming that standard in 2001, saying that we won't participate and then to extend that even further to what we're seeing with Obama. And I don't want to go too far into that, but to see that the fervor and the desire for change and struggle has been funneled very safely into this campaign, which is decidedly opposed or antithetical to what Malcolm was trying to drive us towards, is something that I am very frightened by. So I didn't want to take up too much time because I'm very aware of who's on this panel. But what I wanted to just raise as questions were, how do we in 2008 and beyond deal with the fact that we are not going to ever see the establishment make the same mistake they made in 1959 with The Hate That Hate Produced, the CBS special that promoted Malcolm in the eyes of many to a national stage in the attempt to destroy the image of the Nation of Islam, had the opposite effect among many black people in this country and encouraged people to engage with those ideas and eventually see Malcolm as our international leader. If we're aware that they're not going to make that same mistake again, how do we develop alternative forms of media? How do we develop alternative forms of press? So I'm glad Sirius is involved in this, although I do think we need to buttress what's happening here with an organic, grassroots, underground press. That's what we try to do with Free Mix Radio, turning the hip-hop mixtape into a source of underground emancipatory journalism, freely distributing a hip-hop mixtape that has speeches and interviews and hip-hop that you're not going to hear anywhere else. That kind of attitude. How do we develop community radio, legal or not, for that matter? How do we push the boundaries of getting this information out there, because what I'm seeing coming into my classroom is terrifying. It's terrifying. The people who are telling me that I'm in your communications course because I want to make the next, Flavor of Love, and I want to make the next, how do we turn that into people wanting to hear and understand the ideology and the ideas of a Malcolm X in the 21st century, and what are we going to do about that? Those are my primary concerns.
Dr. Jared Ball, we thank you, sir. We bring on our next panelist, again, Baba Zach Kondo of Baltimore City Community College. He's the author of Conspiracies, Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X. John, Judge, and John can see, I guess you can see my screen too, but the Associated Press does Today in History. This is what they say today. On February 21st, 1965, black Muslim leader and civil rights activist Malcolm X, 39, was shot to death inside the Audubon Ballroom in New York by assassins identified as members of the Nation of Islam. And that's all it says. Now, you, Baba Zach Kondo, why don't you take it from there?
Okay, I appreciate that. First off, I need to pay a quick dues. Herman Ferguson.
Yes.
Where's Herman? There's a traditional African practice that I always follow, in which I ask an esteemed elder for permission to speak. And I would like to ask Herman Ferguson, for one of our great esteemed elders, for permission to speak as a younger. Thank you, brother. First off, I'm very honored to be here, particularly in the presence of James Small and A. Philip Bailey, two giants. And former associates of Malcolm X. What we just read about from the, what did you say, was Associated Press? I mean, that's the party line. And if we're superficial, and if we're, not thinking people, then that works. All that basically means is that we follow the party line. Now, let's be real clear. Malcolm's assassination was very complex. And I'm speaking from experience. I spent 11 years of my life researching the assassination of Malcolm X. I first read about Malcolm when I was in the 7th grade. I read the autobiography. It changed my life. It was the beginning of me developing African-centered consciousness. And as my family would say, I got into that black power stuff, and I've been there ever since. I read an article when I was in high school by Eric Norton that was published in 1967 that dealt with Malcolm's assassination, so that made me curious. Then when I went to college, I got more curious. I read several other books. And so when I went to grad school at the racist University of Virginia, I knew that I wanted to do my thesis on Malcolm's assassination. So for the next 11 years or so, after I finished there, I studied Malcolm's assassination. And what I basically found is that the Nation of Islam certainly was, or the so-called black Muslims, certainly were involved in Malcolm's assassination. But it was much more complex than that. What I determined was that there were basically 3 major forces involved in Malcolm's assassination. The Nation was one, and basically the Nation, as far as Malcolm's assassination, they were the pawns. And the way that everything worked is that very early on, the FBI and the intelligence community realized that there was serious conflict between Malcolm and the family of Elijah Muhammad. And what they ultimately did, and they eventually found out that there was also some conflict between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. And what the FBI primarily did was to exploit the conflict. And they pulled a series they took a series of measures that I document well in my book. And ultimately what they did was, whatever Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad gave them, they used it to the max. In addition to that, they also infiltrated the Nation of Islam. In fact, the Newark Mosque, which is where the men that assassinated Malcolm on February 21st, 1965 at 3:10 p.m. in this building, they all came out of Newark Mosque, Mosque number 25. The FBI infiltrated the Newark Mosque so well that by 1961, they had accumulated so many photographs of members of members of Mosque number 25, as well as members of the mosque in general, that they ended up throwing away most of the pictures because they had, newer ones. That's how much they had tabs on Mosque number 25. So what ultimately ends up happening here is the FBI behind the scenes, because we're not supposed to know about this. What the FBI basically had was what they called a disruption plan. The counterintelligence program, and by 1965, the FBI basically had 3 official counterintelligence programs. The first one was 1956 against the Communist Party. The second one was 1961 against the Socialist Workers' Party. And then the third one was 1964 against the white hate groups, which was really the Ku Klux Klan, the white citizen councils, etc. So the black nationalist hate organization, COINTELPRO, doesn't come until 1967, 2 years after Malcolm's assassination. But don't you think for a second that all of the tactics that were used in the black nationalists, which was by far the most deadly, the most dangerous, and the most violent of the counterintelligence program, don't you believe for a second that the enemy, that is the FBI, the United States government, was not already using those against Malcolm X? And that's basically what my book documents. Now, there were 2 other forces real quickly. Besides the FBI, the Nation of Islam, and then the third group was New York's finest. And the role that New York's finest played in Malcolm's assassination, first off, leading up to the assassination, they pulled a series of stunts that basically minimized the threat on Malcolm's life. And therefore, it's going to help justify why there was such slack security here on February 21st, 1965. In fact, just to show you how bad that was very quickly, there was a 21-person NYPD team that was assigned to the Audubon on February 21st. And what they basically did was they took 2 of them and put them in the Audubon, and they put like 19 across the street in the lobby of the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. And then when Malcolm was killed, and remember now, there were a lot of shots fired here, including a sawed-off J.C. Higgins 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun. When Malcolm was killed, and of course there was also a .45, a German Luger, and then some of Malcolm's people had pieces too. All these, all this noise coming from this building, and these cops right across the street do not come across the street until some of Malcolm's people ran over there and basically stole a stretcher and then brought it back.
I want you to finish at Shabazz Kondo. We've got to take another break, folks. That's a compelling story. I don't mean to break that up. We're going to come right back to that and hear from Shabazz Kondo. Here's some more from our panelists, and then here's some questions from you. This time flies. We're already an hour in. We appreciate you all being here. This is a special edition of Make It Plain as we broadcast live from the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center, the site of the Audubon Ballroom where Malcolm X was assassinated. This is Sirius Left 146. We're thankful to the Coalition on Political Assassinations, and of course, where we sit right now, the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center. A little bit later on, I hope people will have an opportunity to go upstairs and see the ballroom itself. This is Sirius Left 146. We sit to the very left of the statue of Malcolm X, and a very distinguished panel here. This is the site where Malcolm was fatally assassinated 43 years ago. Now, Dr. Jared Ball is here, John Judge, Cynthia McKinney, A.P.D. Bailey, James Small. We had to run when Zach Kondo, our other panelist, was speaking. I wanted him just to kind of finish walking us through that. And where we left off, you were saying that across the street, 19 of the 21 police officers, New York's finest, that were assigned here on February 21st, 1965, they were across the street.
Right.
Okay. Now, just pick it up there, and let me throw this question is, they knew, are you suggesting that they knew in advance what was going to happen?
Well, put it this way. I think that there is a strong enough inference, based on, all that we know, that they knew something. In fact, I'm reminded of something. One of the people, he was assigned to the Rose Room, and he's going to later testify in the trial. One of the things that he testified in the trial about, he said that he was told by the sergeant. The sergeant is across the street, and he was basically told by the sergeant, if there's any disturbance or anything out of the ordinary, call us. He had a walkie-talkie, and he wanted him to call him immediately. Well, I don't know. I'm not a rocket scientist or anything, but it just seems to me that that's a little bit suspicious. Mm-hmm. This is what we know, though. The short of it all is that eventually the people across the cops across the street are going to come back here after Malcolm's followers, several of them run across the street, and they basically just take a stretcher. Now, you might want to ask, they're right across the street from a hospital. Why didn't the ambulance come? Well, that's one of the great questions, because people called immediately to let them know, look, right across the street where at Audubon, Malcolm has been shot, please send an ambulance, and it's never been explained why that never happened. So that's why after about 15 minutes, the brothers just ran across the street. And when they came and took the stretcher, then that's when New York's finest decided to walk across the street. But that wasn't the only thing that was suspect with regard to New York's finest. The New York Police Department was also, of course, responsible for investigating Malcolm's murder. And what ultimately ends up happening is that in the very beginning, if you go back to the newspapers, in the very beginning, New York's finest, and they did their research here, they said that at least 5 men were involved in Malcolm's assassination. You can go back and you can read that. And that's who they were seeking, 5. And then it got real interesting, because after they arrested the third person who was ultimately going to stand trial for Malcolm, then they closed the investigation. So they went from saying that 5, and by the way, the murder team was in fact 5 people. They're going to arrest 3. One was actually caught right here and was almost beaten to death by Malcolm's people, and that's how the cops got him. The others just kind of melted into the crowd. But the short of it is that the NYPD is basically going to close their investigation after they arrested 3. And then the final thing is that the last 2 that they arrested, Thomas Johnson and Norman 3X Butler, both of them lieutenants in the Harlem Mosque, neither one of them were nowhere near the Audubon Ballroom, and they're going to ultimately end up spending time in prison. One will get out in 1985, the other one in 1987. So they're going to spend 22 years of their lives in prison for a crime that the FBI documents that I was able to find, the FBI documents basically say that neither man was anywhere near the Audubon Ballroom. So basically, 2 innocent men are going to be framed up by the NYPD and the district attorney of the New York City, district attorney.
Babazak Kondo, the author of Conspiracies, Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X. In terms of that narrative that Babazak has just shared with us, A. Peter Bailey, James Small, what would you say to that? Is that an accurate recollection of what you recall?
I wasn't with Malcolm, and I wasn't in the States when Malcolm was assassinated, but I came back here very quickly, and Zach is right on points. I've read his research before and read them thoroughly, and I've read much of the literature. Our organization managed to get all of what the government would allow us to have a few years ago, which was tons of literature on the assassination. But there are things that our organization did. We know that the planning meeting that gave the final word on Malcolm's death was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We knew and found out about the mosque in Jersey. We even know, and there's a person who came from Boston to that mosque the night before. We know that on the day of Malcolm's assassination, Malcolm knew this thing was coming. I mean, they'd made it clear they were going to kill him. He knew how it all worked. He had to cover down on his family because the threat was, if you don't come let us kill you, we're going to kill Betty and the kids. They'd already proven they were willing to do that.
That was the bombing at the home.
Yes.
Remember, he went to Detroit after that with the clothes on his back,
right,
and said that, I believe he said he felt that the Nation of Islam alone couldn't do what was being done.
Right. He was clear on that,
right,
by this point. Now, Malcolm, there's a brother named Black Diamond. I don't know whether Diamond is still alive or not today, but with a group of brothers that Malcolm asked for assistance who was coming from Brooklyn that day, they were arrested on the East Side Highway for suspicion of stolen car and held for 24 hours. They never made it to the Audubon Ballroom. Another brother who was a very tight, very close bodyguard of Malcolm was beaten almost to death the night before and was in Harlem Hospital the next day. There was a series of things that led up. If you look at the person rolling the stretcher across the street, you'll see a very sleek young man in a pinstripe suit. Mm-hmm. And if you watch, what's this piece, the documentary? Oh, Make It Plain. And you'll see for the first time that there's a video, there's a movie, there's 16 millimeter of what's going on in the Audubon. Somebody was shooting the 16 millimeter. You will see that same young man walking towards Malcolm's body as Malcolm has hit the stage. Now this young man, when I came home to the organization, was in the organization under the name of Richard Jones, and said he had never been involved in the organization before, but when we reported him to security, he managed to slip away. But you'll see that the we said the FBI is one major agency, but the National Security, what's the NSA, who have something about 6 of these little James Bond type, you can kill who you want, we don't have to know who your name are, what salary you get. These people were the ones who were supposed to protect the international protocol of America, or the international integrity of America, with the boss, the New York City intelligence piece. They were very clear that they were going to kill Malcolm. Malcolm knew the police was involved. Malcolm knew the federal government was involved. Malcolm knew it was going to be very difficult for him to get out of here.
But you said earlier his plan was to leave.
There was not only a plan, there was already plane tickets for Malcolm to leave on Tuesday.
With his family?
But he couldn't, when things are coming down on you like that, you can't get everything in place. And Malcolm knew if he couldn't protect his family, there's no way he was going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's where they caught him. He just didn't have enough time.
Professor James Small, A. Peter Bailey, you were here.
Yes.
You were here in the Audubon Ballroom. Let me get you real close to this mic. You were actually here in the Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, 1965. What's your recollection?
Okay, as I said before, when Brother Malcolm came in to the Audubon that Sunday, I was, I think this is down near where the entrance was, on this end of the building. And I was sitting in like this little, like a lobby when he came in. So he said to me, Brother Peter, when you get a chance, come backstage. I'd like to talk to you. So I said, okay. About 5 or 6 minutes, I went backstage. And what he wanted to talk to me about, and this is what I always emphasize to students, the day before, February 20th, 1965, I had written a hot-headed newsletter type of press release or something that was going to be distributed at the rally that Sunday. Well, when I showed it to Brother Malcolm, he said, Brother Peter, no, I wish you can't distribute this, because he was very, very sharp in knowing the difference where you could go legally in what you wrote. Because once before, I had this, when that uprising occurred in 1964 in Harlem, I had written something where I said eyewitnesses to the murder, and he told me, Brother Peter, you can't use murder, because murder and murderer are legal terms. And when he's acquitted, not if, when he's acquitted, he can sue you for libel. He said, call him a killer and refer to it as a killing, because it's a killing, and he's a killer no matter what the circumstances. And I have a copy of that right today where we went through and scratched out, because we had the old mimeograph machines that you had to turn like this. So rather than run off another 600 of those, we scratched out the word murder and wrote killing in it. I still have a copy of that newsletter. So when I went backstage, he said, I hope you understand. I know you put a lot of work into it, and I hope you understand why I asked you not to distribute that newsletter. And I said, yes, I understand. I mean, come on. I knew that he had, that one time, because eventually that policeman sued SCLC and CORE for putting out information describing him as a murderer. So I knew he knew what he was talking about in terms of being careful about, what you say, so you don't get yourself jammed up. He used to tell us, if you're having a meeting and somebody stands up and says, let's go bomb the subways, he said, kick that person out of the meeting immediately. Because 9 times out of 10, that person is an agent. Yeah. And if you discuss that for even 30 seconds, everybody in that room can be picked up for conspiracy. And even though they might have a weak case, they can keep you tied up in the courts for a couple of years with all your energy, all your resources, all your time trying to stay out of jail for something like that. So that's why I refer to him, my brothers and sisters, as a master teacher. Brother Malcolm was a master teacher. And I don't think there's any more important member of a community than a master teacher. Well, he said, when I got backstage, I said, I understood why. Then I showed him an article that I had clipped out of the newspaper that morning on the establishment of the group in in Louisiana, with the best name that came out of the civil rights movement, the Deacons for Defense and Justice.
That's right.
And there was an article in the New York Times. It was the first time I had seen it. So I showed that to him, and he read it, and he said, oh, that's good, that's good, that's good. Self-defense, which is what he was all about, self-defense. And then he talked about several other things. Now, some people say, oh man, he just knew he was going to be assassinated. He did. But I don't think he knew that day was going to be the day. And the reason I say this, unless he was just saying this to soothe us out, I remember him saying that he had been invited down to Mississippi to speak at SNCC. I think he said SNCC had invited him down to Mississippi. And what he was going to do was, after he did that, he was going to come back and he was going to spend the next 6 months building up the OAAU. Because much of our time in existence, he had been traveling, laying out his foreign policy goals. And he said, I'm going to spend the next 6 months building up the OAAU. So, like I said, I knew that Brother Malcolm was aware that, there were people out to kill him and everything. I just don't know whether he was that certain that it was going to happen on that day. But the point that I want to leave you all with today is, don't get fooled in this thing that just limit the government attempt to paint his assassination as just a question of black folks killing black folks. I give you all this international stuff. I mean, he was serious about this international thing. In fact, Dr. John Henry Clark told me a few years later that he had already gotten 6 African countries who had agreed to sponsor, going to the UN Commission on Human Rights. And now we know the United States, as being powerful as it was, could tell the UN to go jump in the lake, but it would have been a tremendous, tremendous propaganda loss for them to even have to deal with this. And they were determined and out to make sure that Brother Malcolm was not able to do anything that was going to have a negative impact on their foreign policy goals. You have to understand this. He was getting involved internationally. Mm-hmm. When was Martin Luther King assassinated? When he became a factor in Vietnam. I mean, he could have stood here in Harlem or in Birmingham and done what he was doing all for the next 20 years. And they might have watched him a little bit, but he was assassinated when he started going international. And that's the same thing with Brother Malcolm.
Peter Bailey, we would be, just a couple of points, and then I do have a specific question that John Judge and or Cynthia McKinney, I would like them to address. As you talk about the international context, going to the UN, we know that before there was a UN, Marcus Garvey was talking about going to the League of Nations. John and Zach, if I'm not mistaken, J. Edgar Hoover's first target as a young government agent was Marcus Garvey, was it not?
It was.
So, I mean, this was in the 20s. He was around for a long time going after people. But that is true. He was going after Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, in fact, Garvey came into the United States in 1916. They opened up a file on Garvey in 1916. They were called the Bureau of Investigations then.
Okay.
And Hoover, initially he was the assistant. He was like the number 2 person. A guy named Burns was the person in charge. And then Hoover became the top person, I think, during the early 20s.
But thank you, Zach. But as you mentioned, John Henry Clark, who we all revere as an ancestor, he used to like to use the word, James Small, continuum all the time. And when you talk about Malcolm in the international context and then King moving to the national context, that's what he talked about, Garvey's international context, Du Bois' international context. And so it's important, I think, that we understand that these were black men years ago who had an international context, because a lot of times we are portrayed, as Jared Ball said, in the media in such a minimalized and a minimized fashion. But these were black men who were international thinkers. You brought up, John Judge, the issue of the letter, the language, preventing the rise of a black messiah.
From the COINTELPRO document.
From the COINTELPRO. So now, if someone else, I think the message, one of the messages we ought to impart to our young people, that if the government sees the potential of messiahship in you, why shouldn't we see it in ourselves? Isn't that something? And a lot of our young people, if somebody else sees you as a threat, but then you, in your own mind, you see yourself as something less than that because you watch too much BET. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. But anyway, John and Cynthia, we are here now having this discussion. 43 years wasn't a long time ago. Is it true? Is it not true? And as you talk about 9/11, I mean, all this, we can tie those things together when we think of getting information and making it available to people. Colin Powell not only denied the World Conference Against Racism, he made sure, and others, that the U.S. delegation was conveniently back here before 9/11. It always stood out to me. They got out of town and was safely on the ground by September 11th. But 2029, is it true, is the date that many of these documents are supposed to be released? Is that accurate?
Are you talking about on 9/11?
No, I'm talking about Malcolm X and Dr. King. Is that true? There were dates that were set up.
There were
and I'm told some members, former colleagues of yours, who I won't name right now, claim that, Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, that there were dates set so far in advance so that all of them would be deceased when they came out, so nobody would be able to know who was involved in what. Is there any accuracy to that?
Well, Johnson locked the Warren Commission documents for 75 years, and then the House Select Committee in the 70s and late 70s put in for 50 years. But both those, at least in the case of JFK, have been reversed by the JFK Records Act. But the King documents that were part of the same study in '78 didn't even have a set date of release until 50 years. So they're still sitting there. Now, some stuff has been released under Freedom of Information Act. But one thing I wanted to say about this, to put it in context always, historically, even before Hoover started looking into Marcus Garvey, there was someone named Vandeman in Army intelligence that started at the end of World War I compiling information on political radicals, communists, and black leadership. The Army intelligence was spying on Dr. King's grandfather. And I'm sure they were looking at Marcus Garvey or anybody that was, and Hoover inherited Vandeman's multi-million file records on people that they were keeping track of. And that was the basis of the Palmer raids in the 20s and rounding people up and going after political dissidents or anarchists, all came out of Army intelligence. And part of the documents we were able to provide to Cynthia shows that not only was Hoover looking at Dr. King very closely and said he knew when he wiggled his toe where he would move, but also right at that same time was JM Wave, the largest domestic operation of the CIA, doing the Cuban raids under CIA. They were looking under Operation Chaos, as they called it, at Dr. King just as closely. And in addition, we filed and had to go to court to get released the after-action report of Operation Lantern Spike, which was an Army intelligence operation, supposedly anti-riot, that was also surveilling Dr. King exactly as closely. And I'm talking surveillance, emptying the trash can, knowing when their plane tickets were made for, watching them, surveilling them from across the street. 2 people from Army intelligence went up on the roof of the firehouse and took pictures of the assassination that we tried to get loose.
What has Congress not done? What can Congress or elected officials in general do to get more information released about the facts of of Malcolm X and others?
You can propose legislation, and then you get 218 votes in the House and 51 votes in the Senate, and then it becomes law, and the documents are made available to the public. I would just like to say that in the book, the COINTELPRO papers, the Marcus Garvey document is dated October 1919, where J. Edgar Hoover remarks that Marcus Garvey excites the Negroes. That's the quote. And it's too bad that nothing he's not committed any crime that could allow us to deport him. And so this idea of exciting the Negroes is something that I think we need to explore a little bit more, because it shows, as you correctly point out, the power of excited Negroes. And so then that's why they had to make sure that there was no Messiah that rose. That was the language in the COINTELPRO papers. But also, that's why they had to create excitement for Negroes so they could control the excitement. And that's where that October 11th, 1965 document comes into play, stamped by the CIA, where they talk about clean Negroes. And remember when Joe Biden called a clean Negro? Now, that had special significance for me because I was aware of that document.
Wow.
Let us also remember that the language in the founding document of COINTELPRO was to misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize. And so now we have to understand that people have paid a personal price because the government did things that at least one senator characterized as illegal and un-American. Now, the question then that I would like to ask is, in recognition of the fact that the very law enforcement officers who tortured the members of the San Francisco 8 came back 30 years later to arrest them at their homes, have any of the families that have been victimized by the counterintelligence program been made whole?
No. No.
What about the law enforcement agents who were complicit in the torture or this misdirection, this discrediting, this otherwise neutralizing, which meant up to and including murder? Have they been held accountable for their actions?
No.
What about the paid informants who collected silver coins from the United States government to turn their brothers in. Are they dying, did they die natural deaths as opposed to our brother who didn't die a natural death and many others? So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I know that our community has so much work. The truth community in this country has so much work that it hasn't even begun to scratch the surface. If we're talking about holding people accountable, holding the system accountable for what it does, the system is people.
Yeah.
And these are individuals who have names, and we ought to be holding these individuals accountable.
Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. I promise we're going to get to some of your questions, and as you notice, some of them are being answered even as we speak. I know some of you asked questions that the panelists have already foreseen. Baba Zach, you want to make a comment? I'm going to take a quick break so I don't cut you off in the middle, and then come back and get your comment, and then we'll go to the floor and have some questions and comments. Brother, I see your hand raised. Just get an index card, write your question down. If there are any others, be sure you do so. Ms. Rogers is here to receive those. We are, and we thank you all for being here. We're thankful to the Coalition on Political Assassinations, to Vox Pop for providing refreshments, to Sirius Satellite Radio, as well. Our staff, Serena and John, are here. We are broadcasting live from the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center with our esteemed panel, Dr. Jared Ball, Dr. Zach Kondo, Dr. James Small, Dr. John Judge, Dr. Cynthia McKinney, and Dr. A. Peter Bailey here on the, I can bestow doctors. Everybody's a doctor to us. And we are going to be right back. Please stay tuned. This is the 43rd anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X. Sirius Left 146. Make it play. Did Dr. Small forget his camera bag? You want to share them? Okay.
Take the outside.
Oh, okay.
You're right.
And you can have this one.
And you can have this one.
I'll take this
Oh, you found, okay. All right. Is that Smalls? Is that Smalls? Yes, sir. You gonna get it to him? Yes, sir. Okay, good, beautiful.
Okay.
All right. Welcome back to the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz, thank you, John, Memorial and Education Center here on Broadway in New York, the Audubon Ballroom where Malcolm X was assassinated 43 years ago today. Our esteemed panel, Dr. Jared Ball, Dr. Cynthia McKinney, Dr. A. Peter Bailey, Dr. John Judge, and Dr. Zach Kondo, the author of Conspiracies Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X. Baba, you wanted to make another comment, and then I already handed you one of the questions from the audience. If you could address that as well. Baba Zach Kondo, please.
Okay, I'm going to go real quick with the, there was actually a couple comments. We have referenced in here a few times now a counterintelligence document that talks about a black messiah, and I wanted to just throw it in some context real quick. On April 3rd, 1968, Hoover sent out a directive to all field officers under the Black Hate or the Black Nationalist COINTELPRO. And what he basically said was that the government was determined to, quote, prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. It went on to say that Martin Luther King, it said that, it said Malcolm X could have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Then it states that King has the necessary charisma to be one if he abandoned his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines, i.e. nonviolence, and embraced black nationalism. It also talks about Elijah Muhammad was too old, so he was not a factor. It also said H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, and Maxwell Sanford all aspired to that position. So anyway, that's what we're talking about when we reference the Black Messiah memo. The other thing that I wanted to say to kind of go back to what John was saying earlier, military intelligence is significant whenever you deal with leaders in the United States. And one of the reasons why they are a factor is that if you go back to the National Security Act of 1947, there was a mandate in that act that basically said that all of the domestic intelligence division had to share information with military intelligence and vice versa. So a lot of times when you go through, for example, Malcolm's FBI file, there were numerous files that were then CC'd to naval intelligence, army intelligence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was part of the process. That was part of the system. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is that when I was talking about the NYPD, one of the points that we didn't make was that there were at least 4 that we know of, 4 bossy agents. That's the Bureau of Special Services and Investigation, which was the New York City Police Department's secret counterintelligence program. They had at least 4 agents. All of them looked like me. Meaning they were all, well, I would say Africans, but they were really Negroes. I make a distinction. At any rate, they had at least 4 Negro special agents who had infiltrated either the OAAU or the MMI. And one of them, Gene Roberts, actually gave Malcolm mouth resuscitation after he was assassinated. So those were the quick things that I wanted to say.
Wow.
Now, I have a question, so just go through the question now, Barbara.
Brother Omar submitted this question, I believe. Go ahead.
Okay.
What was it?
And his question is basically saying, why is it that photographs of Malcolm's killers have never surfaced after all these years? Shouldn't the assassins' photographs be brought forward? How can you be born in this country after all of this and not have photos of oneself? Yeah. And let me say this. Brother Omar has just completed a documentary that deals with Malcolm X and primarily Malcolm's assassination that I would certainly recommend that everybody obtain it once it's disseminated. One of the reasons why Malcolm's, well, put it this way, the killers, and I'm putting these in quotation marks, the killers that the enemy wants you to think killed Malcolm, those photographs you can see in the newspaper. Okay, and that's Talmadge Hare, who, by the way, was a killer. He was the one that fired the .45. Norman 3X Butler, who was not in the Audubon Ballroom, he was framed up. He was one of the people that I said was framed up. They claim he fired the .38. And Thomas 15X Johnson, who was also framed up, who they claim, fired the shotgun. You can see photographs of them if you go back. But the real assassins whose names were Benjamin Thomas, who was the Assistant Secretary of Mosque No. 25 Newark, Leon Davis, who was a member of the FOI, Mosque 25 Newark, Willie Bradley, who was a member FOI, Mosque No. 25 Newark, and the 4th assassin, the 5th assassin, since we've already named Talmadge Hare, was a man whose actually, his actual name we were never able to determine. So in my book, I give you the name that Talmadge Hare remembered. But for the most part, and I wasn't able to find any more information about him, although I did interview one person who thought that he had died maybe during the early 1970s. So I wasn't really able to get, his name, by the way, was Wilbur, Hare remembered him as Wilbur McKinley or Wilbur Kinley, something like that. So we weren't able to do that. So to get back to the question that Brother Omar asked, we can see the photographs of the people that they want you to see, but I think the reason that we don't see the true assassins is because, well, it kind of opens up a can of worms, since these are the people who, in other words, Malcolm's true assassins are not supposed to be known. And therefore, they've made it very difficult. I tried, and let me just say for the record, I tried to get as much information as I could about the assassins, but the truth of the matter is that with the exception of one of them was more available than the other one, but at the same time, all of them were basically very difficult to find. And for the record, we should also say that 2 of them, as far as I know, are still alive. They live in the Newark area. One of them, Benjamin Thomas, was killed on he was killed on October 29th, 1986 in Apopka, Florida. He took a .357 Magnum to the face. So please share, no tears on that one. And Wilbur McKinley probably died during the 1970s.
All right, Baba Zach Kondo, we thank you. I handed a couple of other questions out. John Judge, would you read your question, and if you would be willing to provide an answer? This is a question from the audience. We don't have a name of the audience member, but John Judge of the Coalition on Political Assassinations, please.
Okay, so I'll add just very quickly that in every single major assassination where there was any chance to have a photographic record, photographic film and photo shots were confiscated by the police. So we're missing many photographs, including even X-ray photographs from autopsies. Is there any power within Congress or the Justice Department to probe into clandestine hit squads which had the means, motive, and opportunity to assassinate Malcolm X or John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy? Well, Cynthia might want to take a piece of this, but of course Congress has the power. Of course Justice Department has the power, but would they use it? And the problem with having, the Justice Department look into it, you're talking about the FBI, who's involved in it in the first place, looking at its own navel. And so, you can't get an honest. When new information opened up on Dr. King, the Justice Department was referred to them instead of a congressional committee, and they put out a report discounting all the new information. I mean, that's been their role, is to keep the lid on the truth. So I don't look to them, and even a congressional panel like the House Select Committee was very politicized from the beginning. And when real people came in, like Sprague, who was an investigative person who would do a murder investigation, he was dumped. And they put somebody else in with an ideological agenda to blame it on the mob. So I think really the only route that we have, besides fighting to release the records, which may tell us the truth without a probe and do our own probing, is possibly to use the legal system. Mm-hmm. And you may have heard just this week news that the Dallas County DA has released files that were hidden in a safe from the time of the Kennedy assassination. And he says that he doesn't care whether they call him a conspiracy theorist. He says he wants an open administration. He is Democrat and he's an African American. So I suggest that we petition the Dallas DA to open a grand jury to investigate the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
All right. Thank you, John Judge. Cynthia McKinney, I handed a question to you. If you would read your question from the audience.
My question says, what kind of pressure has descended upon you since you took your 911 truth stand in terms of threats, blackouts, negative press, et cetera? I think the public is kind of clear on the treatment that I've received. In fact, I understand that a curriculum has been instituted in a couple of colleges now around my press treatment as a sort of a case study in what can happen to people when they dare to tell the truth.
Does COINTELPRO still exist in another form?
Well, actually, I was actually wondering about, they were dumb enough to write it down back then, and we ought to all be smart enough to read it, but I wonder how they're keeping their records now, and, in an era of bits and bytes, maybe we won't have access to the same kind of paper and documentation, which I do believe that there ought to be litigation around the whole counterintelligence program. We've got reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, but here we've got papers that were written by the government admitting what they did, and certainly there ought to be reparations made on the basis of what happened with the counterintelligence program. Mm-hmm. My first campaign theme was warriors don't wear medals, they wear scars. And I think about when Sojourner Truth bared her back and you could see all of the scars. Well, the public has been able to see my scars, and I've accumulated so many scars, but it's not just about September 11th. It was also because we stood down one of the most powerful lobbies in this country. They eventually got me at the ballot box, but in terms of being able to hold firm for accountability and U.S. participation in the Durban World Conference Against Racism, when efforts were made to dash the entire conference, quite frankly, because of the Zionism issue, and I was appointed the chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus Task Force, And the Congressional Black Caucus was represented. We also had a document drawn up that we presented to Mary Robinson, who was the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time, documenting the over 20 some odd members of the Black Panther Party who were murdered as a result of COINTELPRO. So we wanted to follow in the footsteps of this man and W.B. Du Bois by making sure that the international community was aware of the problems faced by us. Unfortunately now, and I will say this and then I will conclude, is that we've allowed these clean Negroes, and I have to use that language because that's the language that they coined. But we've now allowed these clean Negroes to erase all of the moral stature that we have in the international arena. How can it be that Condoleezza Rice can prance around the international stage and she represents black people in this country? And look at the policies that she promotes. Look at Colin Powell. So we have a lot to do in terms of accountability, and we haven't taken care of the responsibility that we have in terms of the political action that even Malcolm talked about. That action had to be with an agenda, and we haven't kept our agenda.
Thank you, Congressman Cynthia McKinney. A.P. DeBailey, you want to say something, please? Yes. Go right ahead.
I think I mentioned to you earlier about the December 1964 UN debate in which two African diplomats, the statements they made. I'm just going to read them to you verbatim so you can see and imagine J. Edgar Hoover and the government forces when they heard these African diplomats for the first time in history make this connection, and it was done as a result of the groundwork laid by Brother Malcolm at the OAU meeting in Cairo in 1964. The first was from the ambassador from the foreign minister of Guinea. He said, in a blind war, hundreds of defenseless Congolese have been massacred, but no indignation was spent by the governments of the so-called civilized countries. Was it because the thousands of Congolese killed had black skins like the black Americans assassinated in Mississippi? And then the second one was made by the foreign minister of Ghana. It says here, Mr. Batsio added that the Belgium, after nearly a century of a system of calculated political castration of the Congo, had finally, one way or another, got her troops back into the country. United States, Belgium, and a couple of other countries were the ones that invaded the Congo. And he says he argued that the United States was no more entitled to intervention in the Congo, quote, than Ghana would be entitled to intervene in the southern states of the United States to protect the lives of Afro-Americans who were from time to time, quote, tortured and murdered for asserting their legitimate rights, end of quote. Now, I want you to imagine the J. Edgar Hoover that you heard described up here. In 1964, the height of the so-called Cold War and the propaganda battle with the Soviet Union, hearing these statements made by these African leaders at the United Nations, knowing that the reason they were making such statements was because of the groundwork laid by Brother Malcolm.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden, bam, he was banned from France, his home was firebombed, he was assassinated.
Yeah.
And I think that those three things came within a couple of months after these statements were made by these diplomats at the United Nations.
Thank you, A.P. DeBailey. And it's important to acknowledge that for Malcolm to go and do that outreach. Because what do we have today? George Bush is in Africa. And there's not an African leader who is speaking like that, because perhaps, there hasn't been a black leader to go over and cultivate that kind of relationship and build the connection, Pan-Africanism. We're very short on time. I want to get a comment from Dr. Jared Ball, and I want to give everybody an opportunity to say where you can find them who are listening. I apologize to our listeners on Sirius Radio that we were not able to take your phone calls. Dr. Ball, a whole new generation. Malcolm talks about a new generation of young people in ballotability. He talks about the importance of the black vote. But now you have a whole new generation now that's being introduced to political activism and perhaps even black political activism, with all due respect to a brother who I do respect, Barack Obama. But how do you reconcile the current political situation? We took a poll on Sirius.com, for example, that asked the question, if Barack Obama was elected president, would Dr. King's dream be realized? And the options were yes, no, more must be done, or I don't know. And 53% of the people said yes. So there is this perception because of the commodification of movement and leadership. Remember, Malcolm was popular when the movie came out. He was on a stamp, you know, and everything becomes capitalized and commodified, and then we move on to something else. We keep it alive here. But for young people who are listening, young people who we're reaching out to, how do they reconcile? Because it's going to be very, very difficult to read and understand Malcolm and confine your politics and your understanding of politics purely to the Democratic Party and the electoral political system. I'm sorry.
You know, one of the things that I did want to mention that I think it will help provide the context very quickly for your question is that when we're talking about the counterintelligence program documents, we have to remember also that number 5 on that list in discussing black people was that there must be an assault on black youth to make sure that they don't head towards the militancy of, in this case, Malcolm X. So that's why when we look at what's going on in today's popular media environment, we have to remember that all that is popular is fraudulent, even the representation of Malcolm and King and anyone else. So when we talk about the popular representation of black struggle and Barack Obama, we need to be very, very suspicious. And I do want to point out that Glenn Ford of blackagendareport.com is in the room, and people need to know not only the great work that they're doing in covering many issues, but particularly the details into why Obama is an absolute break from the tradition being described and discussed here today regarding Malcolm X. I just went and quickly grabbed, I mean, we are given, as professors, apparently, there's a need at Morgan State to give us Black Enterprise, Time Warner's discussion of, or you know, publication of what black people need to be doing. And I just want, I don't know if people can really appreciate what I'm, but on one hand, you have a picture here of the former CEO of Time Warner, Richard Parsons, and on the other, the page just adjacent to it is you know, a picture of Dr. King and talking about realizing the dream in a commercial brought to you by Beyond Petroleum, or formerly British Petroleum. And I just hold that up because, again, I keep thinking of this line that Marshall McLuhan said, that we don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not the fish. An all-pervasive environment is undetectable. So when you create a situation where where Barack Obama and those like him, as Cynthia was saying just a moment ago, whether it's Colin Powell or Condoleezza Rice, where the popular image of blackness is you know, in this case, is made to appear as being something in the tradition of a King or a Malcolm X, it makes it very difficult for people like those of us in this room to deal with our youth and deconstruct everything. And I think Spike's film on Malcolm is part and parcel of that as well. So I was, you know, Brother Kondo and I were driving up here, and I was telling him in one 50-minute class period, I had an experience where a young woman referred to Malcolm 3 times as Denzel Washington. She kept saying, Malcolm, Denzel, and that's, wow. You know, on the one hand, a testimony to the brilliance of Brother Denzel's acting, but also talks about the standard for how we have to interpret Malcolm and all the deconstruction we have to do. So this is done intentionally to make it difficult for young people to see that when someone is saying change, versus someone like Malcolm, who was not only saying it but describing in detail how it must occur. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of struggle that needs. And it's again just done intentionally so that we all have this struggle that we have to deal with. So.
We want to thank our panelists for being here, and thank all of you. Let's go very, very quickly. I want to go to each panelist and have them, if they have an email or website they can share with the audience. Dr. Jared Ball.
Just very quickly, what we always say, it's Vox Union, no disrespect to Vox Pop, but we are at voxunion.com, and as we say, it's V as in voice, OX as in Malcolm, union.com.
Thank you, Dr. Jared Ball. Baba Zach Kondo.
You can reach me at Zach Kondo, ZAKKONDO, at yahoo.com, and you can also contact me at Baltimore City Community College, where I teach history.
John Judge, politicalassassinations.com. Yes. We've got that. Cynthia McKinney, how do we reach you?
You can reach me at runcynthiarun.org or www. allthingscynthiamckinney.com, and I would encourage people to go there to read the Reconstruction platform when we talk about having an agenda.
Okay.
And view the film American Blackout.
A. Peter Bailey, real quick.
Okay. I'm still old school. 301-562-8300.
Thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists. Series left
301-562-8300.
Series left 146. Make it plain. Yeah, I will do that. Baba Zach Kondo has books here for you all to purchase in the back. Conspiracies.